They had cosmic body horror and a redemption playing in the same scene. A burned out cop dying in the dark beside something that had eaten 100,000 people. And they turned it into a Taylor Swift song. The Expanse did that to itself over and over. The strange part, and the reason I'm making this instead of just bitching to a friend, is that the writing was always good. It never got worse. Something else went wrong. Hi, I'm Mr. Phobos, and I was rewatching The Expanse recently. Season 1 absolutely kills it. I was blown away all over again by how good that first stretch is. But the finale bothered me. Those extended Julie Mount flashbacks gave us the answers we wanted, just never at the moment we needed them, and that turned out to be the show's signature move. It kept doing this, it kept trying to manufacture tension by dismantling the real suspense that it had already earned. I don't know whether they were padding runtime or whether they sincerely believed that postponing a climax is the same thing as building towards one. It doesn't really matter. It didn't work for me. It drained off the excitement I actually had while I was watching, and then it tried to feed that back to me later, significantly diluted. Then season 2 arrived and the slide started. The further it went, the worse it got, and I spent this whole rewatch trying to figure out why. So I made this video. It's only marginally more organized than the random thoughts I was having while watching, but it's an honest attempt to come to grips with what the show got right, what it got wrong, and where it genuinely missed. One more thing before we start. At the end of this, I'm going to make the strongest case against everything I'm about to tell you. Not a straw man, a real defense, and I'm going to argue it properly and then tell you why I still think I'm right, and you can decide whether I pulled it off. Here's the distinction the show never seemed to grasp. Suspense is the audience knowing something is coming and being unable to stop it. Withholding is the audience knowing the story already has the answer, but is refusing to hand it over. The first one tightens the screws, but the second one tests your patience and hopes you will mistake the feeling for excitement. Julie Mount flashbacks are the cleanest example because you can watch the mechanism working. That information was load-bearing. The show spent a season making us want it, and it arrives in pieces at whatever tempo the runtime needed, at a point where the wanting had already cooled off. You get your answer and you feel nothing because the appetite it was supposed to satisfy got starved out 3 episodes earlier. Nothing builds anticipation like a flashback to a woman we've seen be unconscious for 10 straight episodes. But now watch him do the same thing at the scale of an entire season. So season 2 opens on homework. Radiation sickness, proto-molecules, political maneuvering. It spends 5 episodes finishing a story that ended in the previous year. The actual climax of Book 1, Miller riding Eros down into Venus, lands in episode 5, which is in February. That's the place the networks put their crap. Most shows open a season with a hook. This one opened with a to-do list. Then episode 6 has to cold start Caliban's war from a dead stop. Season 2 is an ending and a beginning with no middle of its own, and while it's doing both of those jobs, it's simultaneously seating Bobby Draper on Ganymede and Avarisaula on Earth, so it manages to be overcrowded and underpowered at the same time. In the book, Miller's descent into Eros is cosmic body horror. Julie Mal isn't a sick girl waiting to be talked down. She's the biological nucleus of an invasive intelligence that has consumed more than 100,000 screaming belters, and it's still chomping on them. Whatever Miller felt for her, romance ain't the word for it. It's the terminal obsession of a burnt-out, half-delusional cop who decided the most decent act available to him was to die in the dark beside a ghost so she wouldn't die alone. On screen, that becomes a conversation. The register turns romantic, right down to a promise about going to Venus together, which is a hell of a thing to say to a woman who is currently 100,000 people. And the claustrophobia gets sliced open every 90 seconds by cutaways to the Rocinante crew shouting over comms and staring at an egg timer. In this case, the countdown isn't tension. They didn't trust the scene, so they filmed a clock. The most isolating sequence in the series was presented to you via 6 people watching it on a monitor. Hey, that's also what I was doing. The isolation is the point, but the edit would not permit isolation. After hours of countdowns and nuclear logistics and procedural dread, the crisis resolves itself through a heart-to-heart talk with a glowing woman. It's a genre substitution performed at the finish line, and it quietly teaches the audience that the alien is negotiable. And look what they threw away to do it. This is a Lovecraftian nightmare with a redemption buried inside it. A burned-out cop at the end of a wasted life doing the one decent thing he ever managed, in the belly of something that ate 100,000 people that it's still digesting. That's it. That's the tragedy sitting right there. It was fully assembled and required nothing from anybody. And they turned it into some CW Swiftie love song bullshit. Miller didn't need a duet. He needed a wake. Aboard the Rocinante, the show has everything it needs. A clear survival objective, immediate physical consequence, and 4 people stuck with each other whether they like it or not. Step off of that hole and it stalls in 3 predictable places. The UN material is the worst of it, and it really tells us something. Avarasala doesn't appear until the 2nd novel. The show pulled her forward a full book to maximize Shohreh Aghdashloo's screen time. This is a completely defensible instinct. She's awesome, but it also obligated the writers to invent hours of politics that didn't exist. Hearings, marble hallways, veiled threats over drinks. Shohreh Aghdashloo could read the terms of service agreement and I would watch the whole thing. The writers correctly identified this and decided to test it. I dare say she is the only redeeming aspect of those long drawn-out political scenes. Without her, the show fails. If one performer is the only thing that keeps the material alive, however, then the passages don't really work, and the proof is that it took a once-in-a-generation talent to make it watchable. Mars fares no better. Bobby Draper's entire function should be proving that Mars is a military civilization with a terrifying sense of purpose. Instead, her Earth arc is bureaucratic hearings and gray corridors bathed in procedural bullshit. And then there's the Belter factionalism, endlessly tedious ideological posturing between sub-factions. It comes alive the moment Kamina Drummer walks into a room and flatlines the second she leaves. Kara G almost does for the Belt what Aghdashloo does for the UN. Almost. The Belter material is not really more interesting, it's just better populated. Everyone has their favorite Belter. Nobody has a favorite UN delegate. In the novels, Sadavir Ehrenreich is never dramatically arrested. Avarasala outmaneuvers him and strips him of power. She forces him into quiet retirement because a public trial would gut the credibility of the government she's trying to save. That's a political ending for a political character, and it's consistent with everything the books understand about how power protects itself. Television spent 3 seasons promoting him to active villain status, and then finished him off inside of a meeting, evidence forwarded to a tablet and guards at the door. The climax of a 3-season villain arc is a man receiving an attachment. Somewhere in that writer's room, somebody pitched, and then he gets an email. Now, I want to be fair here because that scene does contain one of the finest performance beats in the series. Anna Volovodov delivering the recording gives the moment a moral spine, and Ehrenreich refuses to grovel. His unrepentant answer to that room, delivered knowing he's finished, is better than the machinery surrounding it deserves. The apparatus is inert, but the man surrounded by it is not. That might be why you didn't notice how bad it was. Jules Pierre Mao takes the same trip in reverse. On the page, he's a shadowy operator whose empire dissolves as the conspiracy unravels. That's how that species of money actually dies. On screen, Holden physically collars him at IO and then he goes to a UN cell. It's more satisfying to watch, but it's considerably less scary to think about. The show was at its sharpest as a paranoid Cold War thriller. 2 interplanetary powers on a hair trigger, proxy maneuvering in the dark, covert bioweapon research nobody will admit to, and a handful of people in a stolen gunship trying to publish the truth before somebody blows them up. The proto-molecule was terrifying because it was the thing nobody dared use. Season 3 heard the unbearable tension of war that might start and thought, what if it started? Railgun exchanges, fleet logistics, war rooms, and admirals. The street-level stakes of Ceres and the claustrophobic problem of keeping one ship alive gets absorbed into the star map. Suspense built on restraint cannot be improved by removing the restraint. The set pieces made for magnificent visuals, but at the narrative's expense. Now I want to talk about Naomi. I loved book Naomi, and I did not like the show's Naomi at all. Book Naomi Nagata is the crew's center of gravity. Tall, calm, pragmatic, unshakable, carrying the kind of authority that never once requires volume. She's the person Holden checks himself against. The show rewrote her into perpetual friction, secretive, defensive, argumentative, always kept at a low boil for entire seasons. The composed intelligence that made her load-bearing in the novels is simply absent from the pages Dominique Tipper was handed. There's a belief in this business that a character without conflict is a character nobody watches. So somebody decided that Naomi needed some. They fell back on the most tiring trope Hollywood has. Take an empathetic female character, turn up the aggression, make her hyper-confrontational, and confuse all that noise for strength. Instead of writing a complex woman whose strength comes from her intelligence, resilience, her quiet competence, they built one who is perpetually prickly, refuses to compromise, and treats every conversation like a battle. It strips away the warmth and nuance that made the original character compelling, and it leaves behind an abrasive trope that makes you wonder why the rest of the crew would even want her on the ship. It's the same failure I've been describing all along, externalizing internal depth by making a person louder instead of trusting an actor to carry the thought. And she wasn't drafted into it. Tipper said she wanted to change key aspects of Naomi from the moment she landed the role. This wasn't a note handed down to a reluctant actor. She was an active participant, fully complicit. And then the production went further and stripped the presence out of her visually. Downlit, styled to look permanently exhausted and scowling in nearly every frame. Look at Tipper on a red carpet and you're looking at somebody the show declined to photograph. That's a choice repeatedly made by people whose entire job is knowing what a camera does. They lit that woman like she owed them money. Scale is part of it too, because presence is partly physical. An actor at 6 feet can sell you a 2-meter belter, but an actor who is small and slight is fighting the frame every time she's asked to command a room. There's a wider pattern worth naming here. Genre television spent a decade sanding off the allure of its women while the men are expected to show up shredded, dehydrated, and chemically assisted, lit specifically to display the work. The women get shot like a hostage video and the men like an ad for vitamin supplements. Wes Chatham's Amos is nothing like the enormous slab on the page, yet captures the character completely. That terrifying calm and dead-eyed decency that only ever extends to his chosen tribe. Frankie Adams is nowhere near Book Bobby's dimensions, but delivers absolute military credibility, discipline, and combat weight in every movement. Kara G's drummer is a composite of several minor book figures and became the most convincingly belter thing in the entire series. Cast for essence and the frame will meet you halfway. That's the pattern, and it tells you exactly where Naomi's problems started. In the writer's room, before anyone was cast. Somebody like Stephanie Corneliuson would have restored the cool, calculating ship's brain. Kara G playing Naomi would have given Holden's earnest, Earthboy idealism something solid to hit. But no performer was going to argue her way out of a dialogue written at a permanent simmer. So now we get to the part that convinces me this was a craft failure, because the novels cover identical ground and never bog down the way the show does. I have 4 reasons for this. 1, strict point of view. The books lock you inside one head per chapter and they never cheat. That's called a stylistic tick if you want. It's the pacing engine. Leviathan Wakes runs on Holden and Miller alone, so you learn what these 2 men learn at the speed they learn it. And the paranoia works because the aperture is narrow. Television widened that aperture and the pressure escaped. Number 2 is the interiority does the exposition. This is the mechanical root of a talking head problem. A novel can put you inside Avarasala's skull during a committee meeting, where she's calculating 5 moves ahead, terrified about her family, and silently obliterating everyone at the table. The room is boring and the chapter is delicious. A camera can only show you the room, so the adaptation converts interior monologue into dialogue, and now you have 2 people explaining things to each other they both already know. That's what a talking head scene actually is. It's an interiority problem wearing a costume. What an outstanding director does is let the acting carry the thoughts, not the dialogue. Reason 3, chapters end on a turn. A Corey chapter is short and closes on a change of state. The show routinely runs a long scene and it ends at roughly where it started and then cuts to another one that does the same. The books cross-cut faster than the show does, and that should be impossible. Reason 4, each book closes its own container. Every novel is a self-contained thriller with a real ending. The show broke that container across season boundaries, and once you break the container, momentum has nowhere to accumulate. And when the novels withhold, they do it on principle. Miller doesn't know, so you don't know. Character controls the flow of information, and that's the whole difference between tension and stalling. Now, having said all this, the books eventually catch the same disease. Nemesis Games severs Naomi from the crew and the plot and strands her with the single most insufferable character in the entire show. She spends hundreds of pages trapped on Marco and Eros' ship in a loop of domestic confrontation. The book demands sympathy for Philip while he's actively participating in an unimaginable genocide and converts the most competent engineer in the series into a passive sufferer. Season 5 adapts all of those issues faithfully and inherits every bit of the problem. As an aside, because I think it's worth noting, the genocide is so incomprehensibly massive in the book that the show had to reduce the amount of people killed by orders of magnitude, and it's still millions of people. And we're supposed to feel sorry for a sulky teenager with daddy issues? No, book, no. The sci-fi numbers went one direction. The premiere drew roughly 1.2 million live viewers. Season 1 averaged around 700,000. Season 2 shed another 20%, down to roughly 560,000. Season 3 settled between 400 and 500,000. Sci-Fi held live domestic cable rights with no meaningful streaming revenue behind them, so a show that expensive on that curve stopped being arithmetically defensible. But look at the timing. During that decline, the fandom was not complaining. The fandom was mounting a rescue operation. The audience that stayed was militant about it. The complaining came later on Amazon, and when it came, it landed on exactly the problems I've been describing. Season 5 drew real fan frustration for the Naomi and Philip material. Season 6 got compressed into 6 episodes, left the Laconia thread dangling, and the reviewers who loved the show said plainly that it felt rushed and was the weakest season of the run. So the two curves don't overlap, and I'm not going to pretend that they do. The Nielsen numbers said it first. The fandom took another 3 years to say it out loud. Now I owe you the other side, argued honestly. This is the best case against everything I've said. 1. The political material is the thesis, not the failure. The Expanse is about how power actually moves, and power moves through committee rooms, procurement contracts, and people being outmaneuvered in meetings. A show that made every political consequence arrive via explosion would be lying about its own subjects. The hearings are the honesty. 2. Avrasala early is the single best change the adaptation made. Nobody who watched this show wishes they waited a year for her. Pulling her forward gave the series its most quotable character and its clearest window into Earth. If your complaint about a change is that it produced too much of the best performer in the ensemble, that's not really a structural argument. 3. Softening Eros is load-bearing. If Julie stays an incomprehensible horror, the proto-molecule stays a monster movie. Making her reachable is what converts it into a builder, an artifact, a piece of technology left behind by something that had intentions. That reframing is the entire back half of the series. The scene you're calling melodrama is the hinge the ring gates hang on. And 4. The ratings prove nothing. Every scripted cable drama bled linear viewers between 2015 and 2018. Cord cutting did that to shows with no structural problems whatsoever. And the critics never turned. Seasons 3, 4, and 5 all sat at 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. If the show was collapsing, the professional viewers somehow failed to notice for 4 straight years. So why do I still think I'm right? 0.4 wins, and I'll give it to you cleanly. I can't prove the ratings decline was a verdict on the writing. The industry-wide trend is real, the critical consensus is real, and anybody using a sci-fi ratings chart as proof of narrative failure is doing bad work. I'll take the fandom's later frustration as evidence and drop the Nielsen numbers as anything more than context. The other three I'm keeping, though. On politics, the books do identical politics in a fraction of the space because the interiority carries it. This isn't a defense of committee rooms in general, it's a defense of these particular committee rooms, and the source material proves they could have been shorter and sharper. The thesis was fine, the runtime is what killed it. On Avrasala, I agree she is the best deviation, and that's what makes it dangerous. She's the most charming version of the show's worst habit, generating screen time that doesn't advance anything. A flaw you still enjoy is still a flaw, and it taught the writers that stalling is fine as long as somebody magnetic is doing it. On Eros, which is the strongest one, the book gets both. Julie Mal is a full body horror on the page, and the proto-molecule still turns out to be an artifact of a lost civilization with purposes of its own. Corey didn't need her to be reachable to make it a builder, so the softening brought no structural setup at all. It bought a good cry at the cost of the most frightening idea the series ever had. I want to be clear about something because I've spent 17 minutes taking the show apart, and I don't want anyone walking away with the wrong impression. The writing on The Expanse is good. Consistently, seriously good. Scene by scene and line by line, these are people who knew what they were doing. Nothing in the series is stupid. Nothing insults you. And nobody makes an idiotic decision so the plot can move forward. The dialogue has weight, the world holds together, and the characters behave like adults with reasons. And there's a reason that world holds. James S.A. Corey is actually two people, Daniel Abraham and Ty Frank, and Frank spent decades building this solar system before either of them wrote a word. It began as a pitch for an MMO that never got off the ground, so he turned it into a role-playing game and ran it for years. Abraham was one of his players. His character was a detective on series named Miller. So people were living in this universe long before anybody wrote it down. They were making decisions inside it. It was in real time with real consequences, and nobody had scripted that in advance. That's why the place feels inhabited. It was inhabited first and written down later. You can't fake that in a writer's room. It's the largest asset this production was handed before anyone shot a frame at no additional charge. Everything I've complained about is arrangement and execution. Where a scene sits, what it interrupts, how long it runs, and what it's asked to carry. Those are structural decisions made above the page, and you can make every one of them badly while the actual craft underneath stays excellent. Which is why the dull stretches of the show are well-made dull stretches. Nobody wrote them badly, they're sitting in the wrong place. A good scene in the wrong position doesn't stop being a good scene, it just stops working. It's an arrangement problem. A kick-ass guitar solo still falls flat if you put it in the wrong part of the song. The playing is immaculate. The notes are the notes. But drop it in before the chorus has earned anything, and the whole room just stands there waiting for the song to come back. Nobody blames the guitarist. Everybody feels the wrongness anyway. That's this show over and over. Great players, bad running order. There's a lesson to be learned about Shed Garvey. I like Shed. I don't know whether he was the player who quit the game early and got written out for it, or whether this was the intention the whole time. And I'll admit he was probably redundant the second they boarded the Rocinante, which has an auto dock, so maybe it was for the best. But look at how that death is handled. No build, no cutaway. No ominous scoring, no meaningful last look at the camera. He's mid-sentence, and then he isn't. That's the exact inverse of the Julie Mal problem, and it's the most effective 30 seconds in Season 1. They knew how to place a moment when they chose to. And I think that's why people stayed through the slow parts. Boring good writing is still better than exciting bad writing, and it isn't close. And measure it against what we're getting now. Set The Expanse next to most of what gets greenlit today, and it's not a fair fight. Whatever this show's problems are, they are the problems of people taking the work seriously. That's a different failure mode from the one currently on offer. The best political moment in the series is Aaron Wright, cornered in a conference room, refusing to apologize to people he despises. That's the whole show in one shot. A truly great performance buried inside a procedure from a series that kept parking its most interesting people in rooms where nothing could happen to them, and then it asked us to lean forward. They knew how to write that man. They just couldn't decide where to put him. That's exactly why it stings. They had the material. They had the cast. They had the ability, and they demonstrated it repeatedly, which is the part I can't get past. So what we're looking at is a team that could have done better and chose not to, and I have no idea why. Somewhere between the books and the broadcast, somebody kept choosing the safer arrangement, and nobody in the room seems to have said the obvious thing out loud. I'm going to lament that forever. I'm built that way. I would rather have work that fell short of greatness than work that never aimed at it, and I will still spend the rest of my life annoyed about the difference. I could always blame it on the game players taking the story where I didn't think it should go. Space noir to intergalactic war. But that's a me problem. The way I see it, what we got was good. What we nearly got was one of the best things television had ever done. That's the end of the video. I'm Mr. Phobos. Please check out some of my other videos and do all that stuff that everyone always asks. You know, like, share, and subscribe. It really helps if you leave a comment too. Tell me how wrong I am. Call me an idiot. Call me an istophobe. Get it? It's time to leave now. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Until next time, be seeing ya.